Hello everyone, this is Anubhav Chatterjee and welcome to the first lecture on our course on physiology titled Introduction to Physiology. To start off, let us consider what exactly physiology is. Physiology is the study of the various physical and chemical factors that are associated with the origin, development, and progression of life. Each form of life, from the smallest virus to the largest trees, as well as complicated eukaryotes such as human beings, have one thing in common. They have specific autonomous functional characteristics that continue to keep them alive. Physiology, or the field of physiology, essentially questions what exactly are these functional characteristics and how do they function. The field of physiology is a broad one that can be subdivided into viral physiology, bacterial physiology, cellular physiology, plant physiology, and human physiology, amongst others. In this particular course, we'll be focusing on human physiology. In human physiology, we attempt to explain the specific characteristics and mechanisms of the human body that make it a living being. To start off, let us consider cells, which are the structural and functional unit of life. The basic living unit of the body is the cell. Each organ is essentially an aggregate of many different cells held together by intercellular supporting structures. Human body has a huge amount of cells, which are close to 100 trillion, out of which a quarter or 25 trillion are red blood cells, and the other 75 trillion are specialized cells which perform various important functions. But all these cells have particular common characteristics, which include the fact that in all cells, oxygen reacts with carbohydrate, fat, and protein in order to release energy required for the cell to function, or that the general chemical mechanisms for changing the nutrients received by the cell into energy are basically the same in all cells. All cells deliver the end products of their chemical reactions into the surrounding fluids. These could include secreted products such as hormones or peptides, or excreted products such as carbon dioxide. And finally, almost all cells have the ability to reproduce additional cells of their own kind. The human body, other than cells, is made up of huge amounts of fluid. 60% of the human body is made up of fluids. This fluid can be divided into intracellular or extracellular fluid. In case of intracellular fluid, as the name suggests, this fluid is present inside the cell. Intracellular fluid amounts up to a total of two-thirds of the total fluid present in the body, or 66% of the total fluid present in the body. The intracellular fluid has large amounts of potassium, magnesium, as well as phosphate ions. The extracellular fluid, on the other hand, as the name suggests, obviously is present outside of the cell. It amounts to 33%, or one-third of the total fluid in the body, and contains large amounts of sodium, chloride, and bicarbonate ions. This difference in ion concentration will come in handy later, and we will understand how this particular difference in ion concentration helps in various functions such as nerve conduction in later lectures. Finally, extracellular fluid delivers various nutrients to the cell as well as carries waste products to be excreted. So, continuing further on extracellular fluid or the internal environment of the body. The extracellular fluid is in constant motion throughout the body. Extracellular fluid is transported rapidly in the form of circulating blood mixed with tissue fluids via capillary walls. So capillary walls are very fine structures or membranes through which much of the fluid as well as many molecules can pass through. And this helps in rapid diffusion through the capillary walls and mixing of the entire extracellular. Finally, extracellular fluid contains various ions as well as nutrients for maintenance of various cells. Since extracellular fluid essentially covers all of the tissues as well as the cell as well as cells in the body, it is known as the internal environment of the body. Let us now consider major functional systems of the human body and the concept of homeostasis. So, what exactly homeostasis is? Homeostasis is the maintenance of nearly constant conditions in the internal environment of the body. So, our body always tries to maintain the constant conditions in which it can optimally function. These constant conditions are maintained by various organs as well as organ systems, and in later lectures, we will understand how this exactly functions. The organs and tissues which maintain the constant conditions include lungs, which provide oxygen to the extracellular fluid. Say you have been out for a walk or a run, and after running for a while, you realize that you start to exhale forcefully and more strongly, and a greater volume of air is exhaled and inspired by you. Why does it happen? Why do after running a lot do we start exhaling and inhaling large amounts of air? The reason is that the muscles in our body, when functional, when active, start consuming large amounts of oxygen. This oxygen concentration now drops in our extracellular fluid. But in order to maintain homeostasis, the lungs then try to breathe in more amount of oxygen in order to replenish the oxygen present in our bloodstream. Thus, this is how lungs try and maintain the homeostatic condition of oxygen in our extracellular fluid. Next, the kidneys also maintain constant ion concentrations in our extracellular fluid by filtering excess amounts of fluid and ions through the glomeruli. We will learn more about this when we go through the lecture on the renal system. And finally, the gastrointestinal system provides nutrients which are consumed by the cells. So all the cells consume various nutrients in order to live and function, and these nutrients must come from somewhere into the extracellular fluid. In order to maintain a homeostatic or constant levels of nutrients in the bloodstream, the gastrointestinal system provides these nutrients. Next, let us talk about the blood circulatory system. Extracellular fluid in our body is divided into two major halves and is transported in two stages, which includes the movement of blood through blood vessels and the movement of fluid between the blood capillaries and the intercellular tissue cells or the interstitial fluid. Blood in our body traverses the entire circulatory circuit once each minute in a resting person and up to 6 times in an active person who has been, say, out for a jog or a walk. In the capillaries, there is continuous exchange of fluid between the blood plasma and the interstitial fluid. One thing we have to understand is that any transfer of nutrients from the blood to the interstitial fluid or to the via which the nutrients will reach the cell only happens in the capillaries. The veins or the arteries do not take part in any exchange of fluid or nutrients to the interstitial or the fluid present in the tissues. As we can see, here is the example of the general circulatory system, in which we can see the lungs as well as a schematic diagram of the heart, as well as the various major arteries present in our body, arteries and veins present in our body. Next, let us consider exactly what exactly happens in the capillaries themselves. The walls of the capillaries are permeable to most molecules except large proteins. Large amounts of fluid and dissolved molecules diffuse back and forth between the blood present in the capillaries and outside of the capillaries, that is into the interstitial fluid. Various cells, all the cells in our body are essentially covered in this interstitial fluid itself. And when nutrients traverse from the blood into the interstitial fluid, these nutrients can now be delivered to the cells themselves. The diffusion of nutrients it depends entirely on the kinetic motion of the nutrients molecules and the fluid. Cells are present within 50 microns of the capillaries in order to ensure quick diffusion of nutrients. Thus, extracellular fluid, including plasma and interstitial fluid, is continually being mixed in order to maintain a homogeneous constitution throughout the body. Now, upon considering nutrients and delivery of nutrients, let us actually consider where these nutrients originate. The major systems involved in origin of these nutrients include the respiratory system and the gastrointestinal system. The respiratory system is obviously responsible for delivering oxygen into the extracellular fluid, and the gastrointestinal tract is responsible for digesting and breaking down various food that we intake into smaller carbohydrates, fatty acids, and amino acids that can be absorbed by your blood. The liver or the hepatic system, as well as other organs with primary metabolic function, play a major role in regulation of what nutrients get into the extracellular fluid. Various drugs or toxins are regulated by the liver and are prevented from entering into our bloodstream. And finally, the musculoskeletal system, or the muscles and skeletons of our body, essentially play a major role uh, in our intake of food. So, since we are not like trees who can just take up nutrients from our roots, we have to move around in order to get to our food, drink our water, as well as chew our food themselves. And all of these functions are carried out by the musculoskeletal system. Next, let us consider how these nutrients are then removed after prior processing as the metabolic end products from the extracellular fluid. This removal is majorly undertaken by the respiratory system in case of carbon dioxide and the renal system in case of waste products in the plasma. At the same time as the blood picks up oxygen in the lungs, carbon dioxide is released from the blood into the lungs via the alveolar membrane. The respiratory movement or the exhalation of air from our lungs carries this carbon dioxide, which is then vented off into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is also the most abundant of all metabolic end products. In the renal system of the kidneys, the passage of blood through the kidneys removes from the plasma various substrates beside oxygen that are needed by the cells. These substances include different end products of cellular metabolism, such as urea and uric acid, as well as excess of ions and water present in the extracellular fluid. The kidneys perform their function by first filtering large amount of these excess waste products as well as ions through the glomeruli into the renal tubules. And various important substances which are mostly needed by the body, such as various amino acids as well as glucose and appropriate amounts of water and ions, are reabsorbed back by the kidneys to be delivered back into the bloodstream. But various metabolic end products such as urea and uric acid are poorly reabsorbed and pass through the renal tubules into urine. This is how the kidneys help in the removal of metabolic end products, which essentially include various waste products such as urea, uric acid, excess ions, and water. Next, let us consider how the various functions of the body are regulated. This regulation of body functions is done by undertaken majorly by the nervous system as well as the hormonal system. The nervous system can be divided into three major branches, which include the sensory input branch, the integration by the central nervous system, and finally the motor output. The sensory receptors in our body, such as the eyes, ears, and skin, detect the state of body or the state of the surroundings and apprise the central nervous system of essentially what is happening in our immediate surroundings. The stimulus from the sensory input of our sense organs is taken to the central nervous system, where the various information is stored, processed, and integrated into a form of output that is then sent to the motor output system. Appropriate signals transmitted through the motor output portion of the nervous system to the musculoskeletal system then helps us to perform various tasks in response to environmental stimuli. The next form of regulation is done by the hormonal system. The hormonal system consists of 8 major endocrine glands which release hormones. These hormones are transported by extracellular fluid to different parts of the body where they control various metabolic functions. Examples of hormones include the thyroid hormone, insulin, and as well as adrenocortical hormones. Nervous system essentially regulates the muscular and secretory activities of various glands, whereas the hormonal system regulates and controls various metabolic functions. Next, let us consider various control systems that are in place to make sure that various functions as well as concentration of various substrates remain constant throughout the body. So, what exactly is a control system? The human body consists of various control systems at all levels, which ensure the proper functioning of the whole body. These systems include genetic control, which control the intercellular as well as extracellular functions of the cells themselves by control of various genes that are expressed at different times. These genes that are being expressed can be controlled by intracellular signaling that we will also learn about in later part of the lectures. And these intercellular signaling helps the cell express various genes in various different environments, and thus the overall function of the cell is controlled by the genetic control system. Control systems also exist at the level of individual organs, and all of these are integrated in order to form control systems that span entire organ systems and control the interrelations between different organs. Now let us consider normal ranges and the physical characteristics of various important extracellular fluid constituents. The normal ranges of these constituents are maintained by various control systems present in our body. As we can see on this side, we have the various constituents, their normal value that should be maintained, the normal range in which they are actually maintained, and finally, approximate short-term non-lethal limit in which if the constituents concentration fluctuates, then it will not be very harmful to the body in case it is done only for a shorter period of time. When going through this whole table, we can see that some particular constituents such as oxygen has a large non-lethal limit or a large range in which it can vary without being very harmful to the human body. But some particular constituents such as calcium ion concentration, as we can see, must be maintained between a very small limit, which is 0.5 to 2 millimolar per liter. This this is very important, as if this concentration of the constituents is not maintained, then it can be very harmful to the body. Similarly, we can see that the acid base or the pH of the extracellular fluid also needs to be maintained in particular concentration, particular values, in order to be not harmful to the body. Next, let us consider examples of various control mechanisms present in our body. The first control mechanism we are going to discuss is the regulation of oxygen in the extracellular fluid by the oxygen hemoglobin buffering system. Hemoglobin is obviously the molecule which carries oxygen from the lungs into various parts of our body. Hemoglobin has a strong affinity for oxygen, and when a hemoglobin laden with oxygen reaches a particular tissue where there is already a lot of oxygen present, Hemoglobin, due to its strong chemical affinity for oxygen, will not release excess oxygen into that tissue. But in case it reaches a particular tissue in which there is low concentration of oxygen, then and only then will hemoglobin release more oxygen into the tissue itself in order to re-establish the adequate concentration of oxygen in that particular tissue. Thus, in this way, the whole concentration of oxygen is maintained in various parts of our body. And this system essentially is maintained by the chemical nature of hemoglobin itself. Next, let us consider the regulation of carbon dioxide levels in our body. So, the regulation of carbon dioxide is hugely done by an entirely different mechanism than the regulation of oxygen itself. Increase in carbon dioxide levels in our body can directly affect the pH of our extracellular fluid, as carbon dioxide reacts with excess water present in the extracellular fluid in order to form carbonic acid, which then decreases the pH of our extracellular fluid. This decrease of pH is perceived directly by the respiratory center present in our brain, which then signals to our lungs in order to increase the expiration rate. As the expiration rate increases and and we exhale greater amounts of air, excess carbon dioxide is vented simultaneously into the atmosphere, and thus the CO2 levels in our body decrease, and hence this is how the carbon dioxide levels are regulated in our body. Next, let us consider how arterial blood pressure is regulated in our body. The regulation of arterial blood pressure is done by special organoids known as baroreceptors. Baroreceptors are present in the carotid artery in our neck, exactly somewhere here. Baroreceptors are also present in the thorax and present in the thorax as well as the arch of the aorta. These baroreceptors stretch when the arterial wall itself stretches. When there is an increase in arterial blood pressure, the arterial wall will stretch, and along with them, the baroreceptors also stretch. Once this stretching of baroreceptor happens, it sends a lot of nerve signals directly to the vasomotor center present in our medulla oblongata. The vasomotor centers then signal to the heart and the blood vessels via the sympathetic nervous system, which then decrease the rate of heart beating as well as help the blood vessels dilate, both of which function in order to decrease the blood pressure back to normal values. We will learn more about this whole regulation of arterial blood pressure via the baroreceptors in subsequent lectures, especially the lecture on the circulatory system. These were examples of how exactly the control mechanisms function. After discussing examples of various control systems so that we have an idea what exactly control systems do, let us consider various characteristics of the control systems themselves. One of the major things we have to understand about control systems is that most control systems in our body are negative feedback in nature. What does negative feedback mean? Negative feedback means that when a particular factor changes its concentration, say a particular the amount of carbon dioxide increases in our body, it initiates a series of changes which then signal back to the original factor in order to decrease its concentration. So as we have just seen in our previous slide, the example with carbon dioxide, increasing carbon dioxide signals a pathway which then increases the exhalation volumes of our lungs. We exhale more forcefully in order to vent off more carbon dioxide, bringing the amount of carbon dioxide back to normal levels. Thus, a change in factor initiates a series of changes which produce negative feedback to bring the factor back towards the original value. Example of these negative feedback control systems are a lot, as most control systems are negative feedback in nature, and we have already cited these examples in the previous slide. The other type of control systems may include positive feedback control systems. But positive feedback control systems are a few in our body, as they can be very dangerous. What exactly positive feedback means and how can it be dangerous to the body itself? So what positive feedback means is that, say the concentration of particular factor increases, a positive feedback control system will signal the body in order to further increase the concentration of the factor. And this, as we can understand, this does not bring the factors concentration back to original levels, but instead pushes it towards the extreme value. Thus, positive feedbacks may cause vicious cycles which can be very harmful to the body and may also cause death. Positive feedback can cause instability and continuous increase or decrease in a particular factor, which can lead to a vicious cycle which is very harmful to the body. An example, let us cite an example of such a positive feedback cycle. Say a person who has been in an accident is suddenly bleeds out around 2 liters of blood. The amount of blood present in the body then decreases dramatically to such a low level that there is not enough blood available for the heart to pump effectively. As we will all see in subsequent lectures, heart in order to beat effectively, the heart needs a constant input of a large volume of blood. As the person has bled a lot of blood already, close to 2 liters, the heart cannot pump effectively. As a result, arterial pressure in our body falls and the flow of blood to the heart muscle through the coronary vessels also diminishes. So, further decrease in blood flow to the heart occurs. This further weakens the heart, further diminishing the pumping, further decreasing the blood flow, and still creating more weakness in the pumping of the heart till the cycle repeats itself again and again until death occurs. Hence, such a positive feedback creates a vicious cycle which decreases the amount of blood pumped by the heart and eventually causes death. So, but there are examples of positive feedback systems which can be helpful. For example, in case of blood clotting or nerve signal conduction, positive feedback actually helps the body. When a blood vessel is ruptured and a clot begins to form, multiple enzymes called clotting factors are activated within the clot itself. These clotting factors then activate other previously inactive enzymes in the immediately adjacent blood, which causes further clotting of the blood. So these positive feedback cycles creates a large clot in a very short amount of time, and helps the body prevent any blood loss. Thus, as we can see, positive feedback can cause vicious cycles and can be harmful for the body, but there are examples in which this can also be helpful and is used in our body. Next, let us discuss gain of a control system. While considering various examples of control systems, we need a measure of how effective a control system really is. The degree of effectiveness with which a control system maintains homeostasis is determined by the gain of the control system. So essentially, the gain of a control system is a numeric value which tells us how effectively it can maintain constant conditions in the body. Here is a sample problem in which we have calculated the gain of a control system. Blood transfusion in a person, say, increases the blood pressure from 100 millimeters mercury to 150 millimeters mercury. But as you see, baroreceptors do not like a change in blood pressure in our body, and thus baroreceptors, after getting a hold of this increase of blood pressure, try to signal to the brain in order to decrease the blood pressure back to the original value. This after the baroreceptors have signaled to the brain via to the vasomotor center of the brain, the blood pressure is further decreased back to 110 millimeters of mercury. But as we can see, even the blood baroreceptors have tried to regulate the blood pressure back to its original value. There is still an error of 10 millimeters of mercury. because the original was 100 and the final is still 110. Thus, the gain of the control system is calculated by the correction done by the control system divided by the error that is still remaining in the regulation of the particular factor. Here we can see the correction was essentially 150 millimeters of mercury to the final value of 110 millimeters of mercury. So the calculation for correction is 110 minus 150, which gives us a minus 40. But there is still an error of 10 millimeters of mercury. And that error goes here in the denominator, and has essentially we have the ratio minus 40 by 10, which gives us a result of the gain of the control system as minus 4. Thus, the blood pressure regulation by the baroreceptors is fairly accurate and effective, and as the gain is minus 4. But when considered or compared with other control systems, such as the temperature control system, which maintains the constant temperature of a body at 37 degrees Celsius, the gain of the temperature control system is about minus 33. That is, it is hugely effective. Thus, the gain of a control system gives us an estimate of how effective a particular control system is, and we can compare the effectiveness easily between these two, say the blood pressure regulation and temperature regulation. Next, let us consider the adaptive control systems. The adaptive control systems are complex control systems which work through the feed-forward mechanism. To explain the same, let me cite an example. Say you are on the cricket field and you are just starting out and trying to be a better fielder and understand how to take the best catches and not miss any catches at all during the game. But when you start out, obviously you will miss a lot of catches. But you will see that as you put practice into it, you improve little by little, and you start understanding how you should stand, how you should put your hands out in order to catch the ball, what speed the ball is coming towards you. You can easily judge the trajectory of the ball is also what you can judge. With what speed you should run towards a ball in order to catch it effectively. Everything you understand and get hold of as you continue to practice, practice, and practice. But in this whole scene of how you start out being a not so good fielder and end up taking perfect catches in the final match is an example of adaptive control systems. The sensory signals from this whole movement of catching a ball is informed to the brain via the sensory inputs. Say from our eyes, our ears, the sensory inputs inform the brain of the various movement that we are doing. If the movement is not performed correctly, that is, you miss the ball or you miss the catch, then next time the brain sends a feed forward signal to the muscles in order to better perform the movement. Further correction occurs for the subsequent movement, and further correction still occurs in case the subsequent movement is not also correct. So in this way, this is essentially a feed forward mechanism in which the brain understands what was wrong and then performs effectively in order to catch the ball perfectly. Thus, in a sense, the adaptive control system is a delayed negative feedback in which, say, you were trying to catch the ball, but you were too fast in closing your hands. Next time, you will try to make sure that your hands stay open for a longer period of time so that you can catch it. But say then again, you have made sure that you have not closed your hands fast enough, and the ball falls into your hands and then drops out as well. So the next time you close it faster, but not as fast as the first time. And through this adaptive control system, you will understand the brain understands what is the best possible movement or the best possible signals that it needs to send to the muscles in order to catch them. Thus, this was the adaptive control system. And finally, with that, we are at the end of our slides and end of this particular lecture. The reference for this particular slide set is the chapter 1 from the textbook of Medical Physiology by Arthur C. Guyton, the 11th edition. I will try to add the slides to the description in order so that everyone can access it. And in case you need further clarification on any of the topics that we have discussed, then you can just write it down in the comments, as well as uh, uh, you can mail me as well with any doubts. In the subsequent lectures, in the next particular lecture, we will discuss about cellular physiology and how cells essentially function. And after that, we will dive into various systems that we have discussed throughout this particular introduction lecture, starting with membrane physiology on the nerve and and the muscles and how exactly they function. Thank you for listening to the video.